Please note that the views expressed on this program are those of the individuals who speak them, and not necessarily those of Portsmouth Community Radio, its Board of Trustees, members, volunteers, or underwriters. Good evening and welcome to Spirit Radio. I am your host, Willie Hassell. Along with my co-host, Lynn Nickerson, we will take you on a journey into the unknown where the paranormal becomes the normal. A journey to a world cloaked in darkness where reality becomes a thin veil. So sit back, relax, and join us as we venture into the shadows, the darkness, the unknown, and back. And good evening once again, and welcome to Spirit Radio, the Paranormal Experience. I am your host, Willie Hassell, your gatekeeper to the dark side, your guide to the realm of the unknown, the unseen, the unthinkable, and she is the always lovely, she is the mystical, she is the mysterious, and she is Lynn Nickerson. Good evening.
Hey, good evening, Willie. How are you?
I'm doing good. How are you doing tonight?
Oh, great. Thanks.
Not a bad day out for a New Hampshire September day, huh? What do you think?
Yeah, you can tell fall's in the air, though.
Oh, yeah, I know it.
It's a little too soon.
A little too soon, yeah. Well, that's all right. I've had enough heat for 1 year, I think.
Yeah. We had all of our summer's heat a couple of days ago, didn't we?
Yeah, last
Squeezed
week.
all into one day.
Last week, yeah, I know it. All right, well, tonight we have a very good guest on Spirit Radio, the Paranormal Experience. We are welcoming to the show Richard Estep. Richard is a paranormal investigator and author of many books. His interest in the paranormal began at a very young age, and he got involved in paranormal research in 1995 in the UK after a night's investigation at the infamous St. Botolph's Church. He then spent the next 5 years investigating the haunted hamlets of Great Britain as a member of Andrew Wright's Leicester-based team. In 1999, Richard moved to the U.S., and in 2006 co-founded Boulder County Paranormal Research Society with his wife Laura. In 2013, Richard started writing about his paranormal experiences, and he has a number of books published on the subject. His latest release is titled In Search of the Paranormal. I lost my place. The Hammer House Murder, Ghosts of the Clink, and Other Disturbing Investigations.
Ooh,
so please, let's welcome to the show Richard Estep. Good evening, Richard.
Hi, Richard. Welcome.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the invitation.
Oh, so nice to have you on.
Yes, thank you for coming on.
I don't know how you juggle all the hats that you do. You're an EMT and you're a firefighter and you find time for investigations. How do you do that on your schedule?
Well, as the old saying goes, if you want to get something done, ask a busy man.
Yeah, I know, but...
Yeah,
you know,
that's right.
It's right up there with never trust a skinny chef.
Okay.
That's a very good point.
Yeah, really, the answer is it doesn't seem like work if you love what you do. So I'm a assistant chief paramedic, which I love doing, and I teach in several EMT paramedic programs also. And I like to write, and that's the way that I unwind.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, but I would think it'd be kind of like going on a mini vacation each time you go on one of these investigations.
It is kind of a working vacation simply because you have to, get something done at the other end, whether it's staying up all night and investigating and adjusting to time zones and those kind of things.
Yeah, that can be the hard part about it, the hours.
Well, when you were young, you were very psychically aware, but I don't recall, did you happen to see apparitions?
Well, I wouldn't say that I was psychically aware.
No?
I have all of the intuitive ability of your average house brick.
Oh.
But I did grow up in a house where it seems that pretty much everyone else in that house had seen apparitions and experienced paranormal activity, but that had been quite a few years before I was there. Mm-hmm. It happened when my stepfather was my age, in fact. And the house had multiple apparitions in it. perhaps the most notable being an old lady who would tuck the children into bed at night.
Oh, that's neat. But you never saw her.
I used to lie awake at night, half wanting to meet her and half terrified that I would.
Yeah.
But like so many of those stories of apparitions, she seemed to kind of disappear as if a battery ran down. And so by the time that the next generation of the family had come along, the one that I was part of, she had disappeared and has not been seen since.
She must have really liked your family.
I like to think that she was probably a protective spirit that, had those maternal instincts and wanted to care for the children of the house.
Did they have any idea at all who she was?
They didn't. The assumption was that this was a previous tenant of the house. At least that's what my grandparents had thought. But they didn't have a concrete identity on this lady, and they didn't dig too deeply into it, to tell you the truth.
Yeah.
I've often thought I'd like to check the property record, though.
Well, when you were growing up, Richard, was the Twilight Zone being shown over there in England?
Was which film, sorry?
The Twilight Zone with Rod Serling.
Twilight Zone.
Yeah.
It was, but it was not a prime time show. I think it was in a hard-to-find time slot.
Okay.
But I was aware of the Twilight Zone. I think Rod Serling was a superb crafter of stories.
Oh, yeah. I was just so fascinated by that show. Always at the beginning, I knew I had to sit tight because the beginning it always seemed a little boring. But by the end of the show, he knocked your socks off. The way the program always ended. Just really good writing.
Excellent writing indeed. And I have the box set on DVD and they hold up very well even today.
Yeah. So, St. Botolph's Church. That place is quite a magnet for investigators, isn't it?
It was. It seems to have quietened down of late. And
Really?
I know that because, my friend Dave Kirby and his wife recently visited and said that it's very peaceful and calm and tranquil. But part of the reason it was something of an
attraction?
Attraction for the paranormal investigators at the time was that it had been mentioned in a book, which is now sadly out of print. The book is called Ghostbusters UK, unfortunately. I don't like the title, but I like the book. And it was an investigator called Robin Thurman and his team had been chased out of there by a gaseous cloud that arose from one of the tombs. So all of the activity that had been reported there was rather sinister in nature.
Yes, I know.
Yeah, and when we arrived there to investigate, we found several chickens with their heads sliced cleanly off as if they had been used as part of an animal sacrifice. There was excrement smeared on the walls and on the tombstones. It was very, very sad. And fortunately, that has been cleaned up and restored somewhat
Has it?
Well, that's
since the
good.
mid-90s.
That's good. Yeah, I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, because I was looking on the internet, and it's just a beautiful structure. It's so old that it's all stone, and it's got a floor that's got inlaid colored tile that I would imagine is like from Italy or something, or Spain. It's a beautiful structure.
It is, and yet at the time, there were satanic symbols painted, sprayed on all of the walls, and it had been quite horribly abused, unfortunately.
Yeah, and it just seems to attack negativity. Did you see personally the light in the tower?
So the light in the tower was what had been referred to by a team member on a former investigation as the beast. She said that there was some kind of demonic inhuman entity inhabiting that tower.
Yeah, there could have been.
And I don't know if that was the case or not. That was purely second-hand information. I will tell you, though, that when I was coming around on the corner of the church with another investigator, a third observer came on the radio and said, "Hey, Richard, who is that behind you guys?"
Ooh.
And so we turned around, there was nobody there, and this observer was quite startled and had seen a tall, cloaked and hooded figure standing behind us both. They described it as being monk-like, but taller than I am. And I'm 6'3" in height.
Oh, goodness.
So this thing would have had to have been 6'5", 6 or something in that ballpark.
Oh.
That's I don't know. When
Yeah,
you
just don't
turned
look
around,
behind you.
yeah, when you turned around, really, did you hope you did see somebody, or you didn't?
Well, it's the holy grail for us, isn't it? As
Well, it is.
paranormal
It is. I
Yeah.
know
see an apparition.
it is. But sometimes we wonder, do we really want to see it or not?
Yeah, the old saying, "Be careful what you wish for."
I know.
Exactly. Yeah.
There was something else. There was some kids on the internet that they were like, they had been prep school kids when they did the investigation, and they were doing a reenactment. And I would have sworn it was St. Botolph's Church, but see if this rings true. One of them said that he felt that he entered into a time slip here, and he started to go up a flight of stairs chasing a monk, and he got several steps up the staircase, and it dissolved, and he fell, and the monk disappeared. Does that sound familiar to you?
I don't think so, because there is no staircase at St. Botolph's.
Well, yeah, it disappeared.
Yeah, in order to access the tower, actually, and that's the only reason we did not go in there and see for ourselves, you would have needed a 3-story ladder, an extension ladder, to get through the trapdoor.
Mm.
So yeah, it has what we call cathedral vaulted ceilings, so there is no upper floor.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So what else did you experience there, Richard?
Well, another thing that has stayed with me for a long since then is the fact that we'd all kind of started to doze off inside the church. I'd say maybe an hour before dawn, and even on the best of investigations, it's a long road trip to get there, and you're running on caffeine and adrenaline,
Mm-hmm.
And there was no electricity, so once the tea in our flasks had run out, we're reduced to basically soda. And so we were starting to flag, and we decided to sleep in watches. So some of us would remain awake, some of us would take a safety nap inside the church. And we were woken up by this screeching, screaming noise that was coming out of the thin air directly in front of us.
Well, that's frightening.
In the church.
In the church.
Flew awake, thinking, had some kind of animal gotten in here. But there was nothing there, and we had a very clear field of view because we'd been resting with our backs to one of the structural walls. So we could see everything inside that church, and there was not a living soul or creature in there.
And did you say the recorders picked that up or not?
The recorders did pick that up. It was an old analog tape recorder at the time,
Mm-hmm.
which I no longer have, unfortunately. It got lost in my move to the U.S. So we're kind of spoiled right now because everything I record ever goes to a computer server, and I have all that saved digitally. But back then, we were loading VHS cassettes into our video camcorders, and we were using audio cassettes, those 90-minute cassettes.
Right.
And unfortunately, a lot of that has gotten lost.
Oh, that's unfortunate. But do you recall if that showed up on the recorder, that screeching?
I believe that it did.
Oh, that's really creepy. There's an odd dichotomy that oftentimes you'll have a personal experience, you'll hear something, but it doesn't show up on the recorder, and then the converse situation is true. And I just think that's very odd.
Well, I think that, and you can make the same argument with witnessing apparitions. If you read the literature, for example, there are circumstances in which you can have a number of people in one location. Some of them will see an apparition, some of them will not, which makes me wonder how it is that we actually experience these phenomena.
That's right.
Is the sound actually entering our ears? Is there really light entering our eye reflected from this apparition? Or is it some telepathic or other paranormal means of communication?
Yeah, a wavelength that some pick up on and others don't. Some aren't sensitive to it and others are.
Indeed, and what I advise people to do when they say they're seeing apparitions around their house is to take a finger and to press on their eyeball, which sounds a little odd, but if you do that right now, you'll see the view you have is starting to blur as you squeeze the eyeball.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Just slightly. If you're seeing something that is objectively there, that image is going to blur when you push on your eyeball.
Mm-hmm.
If, on the other hand, it doesn't change, that is something that you are, for want of a better term, hallucinating, which doesn't mean you're not experiencing an apparition, but it means you're not seeing it with your eyes. Your brain just thinks it is.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting.
Yeah, really. I like that theory. I Haven't heard that one before.
No, I haven't either.
Yeah,
Somebody's
when
got to
you
explain
squint,
it.
that's exactly what you're doing. When
Yeah.
you squint to see something, you're compressing your eyeball into a better shape.
Yeah.
It's the same principle.
Okay, so getting back to the church, wasn't that place frightening to you?
You know, it was odd. It wasn't frightening at the time, apart from one incident, and I did document this in the book. I was sitting outside, and this would be maybe right before daybreak. I think we'd just woken up after the screeching. And I'd been in and out of that church for at least 12 hours since the afternoon beforehand. And so one of the other investigators said, hey, we need to go on inside and collect some things. We should start packing up our equipment. And I can't describe it as anything other than a feeling of just dread.
Really?
And I said, you couldn't pay me enough to go back into that church right now.
Oh,
And for the life of me, I could not tell you why. There was nothing happening that made me, particularly. It was a very odd, totally subjective feeling, and it passed within the space of about 20 minutes, and I was able to go back in and get my stuff. But that's happened to me very rarely. I'd say a handful of times over my 20-year career.
So you were sensing something wasn't right, but you just didn't know what it was, huh?
Well, or my intuition, or call it what you will, my subconscious. It may have been something completely irrational. I don't know. But I've been in genuinely life-threatening situations a number of times as part of my profession, and I've never experienced that when there was something genuinely terrifying going on. So it was odd.
Well, it's good that you listen to your intuition. It's good that you have it. Probably saved you.
Probably did.
Well, I did listen to the instinct. It just seemed wise at the time.
Why put yourself through that? Getting to the point of the what we perceive and what is actually there. Another good example of that was your Chapter 5, A Clash of Armies at Edge Hill, and the reenactment of that Civil War scene seen by so many people. That is really incredible that so many people witnessed the war taking place again, over and over again in the sky. Would you like to talk about that?
What's most fascinating about that, I think, is not only the caliber of the witnesses, because many were sent by the king as his proxies to delve into the matter, but some of the observers actually recognized themselves.
Oh, you're kidding.
No, so they had not died in the battle, and they'd returned, and they witnessed the reenactment, which tells us quite clearly that we're looking at some recording that has been impressed on the atmosphere of the battlefield somehow, and was being played back, if you will, by a mechanism we don't yet understand.
Yes, and that was so well recorded, and it repeated itself several times, although it faded away a bit with less frequency.
Yeah, and again, we have that image of the battery draining almost, or the analogy I like to use. We all remember VHS tapes, of course. Remember when you used to record over one or play it back so many times, the image would start to, the tape demagnetized because of wear and tear, the image would get worse.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
I think it's a similar principle, that this stuff just doesn't retain its clarity and play over and over again. And what fascinated me afterwards was that once the replay stopped happening, locals still reported auditory phenomena.
Really?
The sound of screaming and hoofbeats and those sort of things. So it was as if the soundtrack remained, but the image had faded.
The image had faded. And for those who don't know, this was the first battle of the English Civil War, I believe, wasn't it, Richard?
It was one of the major battles, one of the turning points of the English Civil War, yeah.
It was October 23rd, 1642, and it was the Parliamentarians against the Royalists, and it happened at Edge Hill in Warwickshire. And it wasn't until Christmas was the first reenactment or the first replay of this. Is that right? Christmas Eve was the first time that it happened, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's correct. And it became news, of course, far and wide, to the point where it reached the King's ear in London, and he said to some of his most trusted advisors, go and figure out if there is anything to this.
Yeah, that is incredible. Now, you did go there, did you not?
I did, and had a very quiet and uneventful night, I'm afraid. Sleeping in my car, being cold.
But that's right, you were freezing.
Yeah, there was a great deal of wind. So battlefields are wonderful places, but they're tough to investigate. Gettysburg is another great example. The phenomena going on at Gettysburg, though, is still very prevalent to this day.
The what again, Richard? The Battle of Gettysburg?
The field of Gettysburg.
Gettysburg, yeah. That is highly active. And
It is, but then you look at the number of people that were killed in that battle, and I've heard the number quoted as more Americans died over that weekend than in the entire Vietnam War, and it all took place on this very small, relatively small area of terrain. So you've got a lot of blood and death and emotion, which was crammed into a very small area.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that's going to leave a mark, isn't it? That's going
Yes.
to leave a residue on a place.
And so many of them were buried there in the field that they fought.
Yes,
They just buried under that ground.
indeed.
Have you had a chance to investigate there yourself, Richard?
I've been to Gettysburg. I'm a Civil War buff.
Oh, really?
But I
Yeah,
went
yeah.
purely as a historical tourist, and I would very much like to go back. From what I'm told, though, the Park Service quite reasonably doesn't want people on the battlefield
Right.
Overnight.
Yeah.
So, and you also have to be very careful and respectful, because it is to Americans, it's hallowed ground. It should be to everybody, you know. A turning point in the nation's history. It's a place of great respect and veneration. And I can remember walking around the cemetery, which is where Lincoln delivered the Gettysburg Address, I believe. And there is a very real atmosphere there that history turned in this place.
Mm.
And so I would be very, very worried. I have some good friends that do investigate there. They're called the Gettysburg Ghost Gals, in fact. And let's wave hello to them over the radio. They're doing the Scarefest convention in Kentucky this weekend.
Oh, really?
Oh,
Hello,
they-
guys.
Yeah. Hey, guys. Hey, ladies, I should say. And they have got a very good book out on the subject. And there are several good books on the subject of the Ghost of Gettysburg.
What is the draw for you, Richard, to be attracted to the U.S. Civil War?
Well, I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
What is the draw for you to be attracted to the United States Civil War?
Oh, well, partly it's living here, but here in the States itself. But I find all military history, and indeed all history in general, just fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
But I love the fact that this was not that long ago in the life of your nation. The English
Right.
Civil War was so long ago that
It
there
was.
really aren't that many marks left on our society from it. And yet if you go to Gettysburg, and you can still see cannonballs embedded in the walls of buildings. You can still see bullet holes in doors where the musket balls, the mini balls, were shot through them. It's living, breathing history.
Mm.
And had the battle just gone a slightly different way, America and indeed the world would look completely different today.
Yes, you're right.
And I find it fascinating. The best kind of history, you can walk among it, you can touch it, you can live it, you can breathe it. And Gettysburg is basically a living, breathing time capsule.
Yeah, I've got to agree with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've seen several videos on the internet, and there are a couple that are absolutely striking. That there's one that is taken from the distance, at dusk, and you see troops of soldiers crossing the road. They're
Oh,
ghost
yeah,
soldiers,
I remember
but
that
they're
one, yeah.
very clear.
Now, is this the footage that the Clink brothers did from Ghost Lab?
I think it is.
I remember, I've heard their story, and I find it very compelling that they saw this column of troops. I want to say they were Union troops in blue, which were marching across the field in front of them and then disappeared.
Yes. It's just fascinating. You
Stories
can make
that
out their
surround-
uniforms, and then they just fade away.
When they shot the Ted Turner's TV movie of Gettysburg back in the early 90s, I'd heard stories that because the reenactors were allowed to actually camp out on the battlefield,
Mm-hmm.
there were stories of ghostly soldiers being seen at the edge of the firelight that nobody knew, that would not acknowledge
Really?
any of the reenactors. Yeah, and also that commands were being heard shouted as if troops were being ordered to move by officers as the men camped on the field at night. So it's a very haunted place.
It is. And I really think that the enactors being there, that they kind of give energy to it to float, kind of like recharging the battery, don't you think?
Well, I think it's very similar to that. And I don't believe in provocation when one investigates, but I do believe in stimulation And by that I mean that
Agreed.
if
Yeah.
you're wearing the uniforms and you're firing the same sort of muskets and cannon, I think that there is going to be a huge draw for any presences still on that battlefield.
Yep.
And I'm about to conduct an experiment of that with my friends Kim and Cami Anderson and my research team in Utah next month on Halloween. We are staying in, they own an old community hospital, which is now a Halloween haunted house called Asylum 49.
Oh.
And that is haunted by a number of the former patients and staff, including a ghostly ER doctor.
Oh.
And of course, as a paramedic, I kind of fell in love with that story. And indeed, I'm working on a book about the hospital now. But what I'm wanting to do is I'm taking several of my fellow paramedics with me for a week to go to the haunted house. And the emergency room is still there. It's in exactly the same condition it was when the hospital was closed. There are still defibrillator machines there,
Really?
the original beds and everything, and half this stuff still works. So I'm taking some training supplies with me on the road trip, and we're taking the mannequins that we use to train our paramedics, which are very realistic.
Mm-hmm.
We can intubate them, and we can start IVs, and we can drill the bones.
Oh, brother.
So what we're going to do is run a cardiac arrest or two in that emergency room on the mannequin, and we're really going to push the drugs that we would use and deliver the electric shocks to defibrillate, those kind of things, and see if we can stimulate any of the former residents to put in an appearance.
Oh, goodness. I bet you'll get some kind of reaction.
Yeah, that should be
Well, we're going to film it from all angles, too.
Wonderful. Oh, that really sounds neat. And when was this hospital built?
I don't know when it was built yet. I've still got to actually do the bulk of the research on that book.
Late 1800s, perhaps? I mean, how...
I don't think it's that old, no.
Okay. Well, Richard, we're at the bottom of the hour. We're going to be taking a break here, and we're going to come back, and we'd like to talk a little bit about the House of Angels. That really intrigued me, as well as the Clink. So we're talking to Richard Estep, In Search of the Paranormal, the Hammer House Murder, Ghosts of the Clink, and Other Disturbing Investigations. And we'll be right back. Supernatural Magazine, the UK's newest paranormal magazine, provides support to Spirit Radio, the Paranormal Experience. It is the magazine's goal to bring every aspect of supernatural news and research from around the world under one roof to create a universal platform for all those interested in the supernatural. More information is available at supernaturalmagazine.com.
And you are tuned to WSCA 106.1 FM in Portsmouth, West End. And we want to remind you that the West End Barbecue on September 17th, 2015. Join us for the party of the year. Your favorite Portsmouth West End businesses have come together to host a West End barbecue. You don't want to miss the yummy food, cold drinks, and raffles, and fun surprises we have in store. Mark your calendars for Thursday, September 17th, and join us at the Red Post Realty for a fun, family-friendly night. And many local merchants have made donations to make this possible, and that is at the Red Post Realty, 767 Islington Street, 2A, food donated and provided by local merchants and some upcoming guests.
Yes. All right, our upcoming guest list starts with September 19th. Another cryptoid creature which we haven't covered yet to date is in our conversations is the Chupacabra. In one of his latest releases, titled Chupacabra Road Trip, author Nick Redfern will tell us what he knows about the subject. On September 26th, we're welcoming back Ken Gerhardt of Flying Humanoid fame, and he's also the featured lead in his new show titled Missing in Alaska, as seen on the History Channel. The show covers such topics as body snatching in London, mysteries on Mount Hayes, man versus hairy beast, and many other disturbing topics indigenous to Alaska. October 3rd, our regularly scheduled guest is once again Shane Sirois of TrueGhost.com, and Shane will return to follow up on last weekend's discussion, and he'll have any new updates as well as new investigations he'll discuss with us. And last but not least, October 10th, it's been 10 months since we last hosted Betty Andreessen Luca and her husband Bob Luca on Spirit Radio. So on the 10th, we'll continue to discuss their personal testimonies about their UFO abductions, which are chronicled in several books written by Raymond E. Fowler. That'll be another suspenseful Saturday. And that's our upcoming guest list.
Okay, so shall we now go back to the phones with tonight's guest, Richard Estep. Welcome back, Richard.
Thank you very much.
Hi,
Good to be
Richard.
back. And could I just clarify something before we move on?
Please.
Sure.
While I was waiting just between segments, I pulled down my report from St. Bartol's Church just to make sure. And as I recall now, and I had to have my memory jogged by the report, we did not record on tape that screaming. We recorded the commotion of 6 or 7 startled investigators, but not the scream itself.
That's what
My memory
thought.
was playing me false.
Yep. I just find that so peculiar. In one of our investigations, we heard someone tramping around on the second floor, and we thought it was one of our other investigators. And come to find out, that tramping around never came up on the tape.
Yeah, there was 3 of us sitting downstairs, and we all heard this very loudly. Went on for about 5 minutes.
And I was getting ready to say, well, will you keep it down because we can't pick up anything with you making all the noise.
And we were able to prove afterwards with our equipment that the other investigator who was upstairs never got out of his chair.
And both recorders picked up nothing. It was just
We
very
experienced
odd.
this recently at the Callahan House in Longmont also. Investigator Joey Stanford and I were sitting downstairs in the control center, and from directly above our head we heard a series of studs, and they were quite loud, as if somebody in heavy boots were working their way across the ceiling above us.
Mm-hmm.
And yet the investigators up on that floor heard nothing, and nor did the recorders.
Yeah, I just don't understand that. And then you
I
get
know
other
it.
times that stuff is picked up, voices are picked up, of course, that you can't hear. So why is there that kind of dichotomy? I don't get it.
I think the most rational explanation is that we do not yet understand how these phenomena are sensed. I don't know that we're actually seeing them with our eyes. I don't know that we're actually hearing them with our ears. And the same is true with auditory phenomena as well. Olfactory phenomena, smells.
Mm-hmm.
Again, there are those common smells of lilacs you get in hauntings.
Oh, really? Lilacs?
Yeah, and one thing that as a medical professional I've always found remarkable is this. The sightings, the smells, the sounds, those are also common when somebody is having what we call an aura before a seizure.
Really?
And what's happening in that circumstance medically is that you've got a cluster of cells within the brain that are starting to fire at random. It's kind of like the oncoming storm of the seizure. And I wonder if there's a similar mechanism in place for when we experience these phenomena, and that's why they aren't recorded.
Well, could it be that it's there, but since typically you wouldn't pick up on it, it's just that at the time, just before the seizure, they're more highly sensitized?
It's certainly possible. We have such a limited understanding of the brain and the science of neurology that I wouldn't rule anything out.
Well, there was another instance of Willie and I both picking up on the scent of eucalyptus leaves, and just the two of us smelt it. And
you were in the middle of a crowd of people?
Well, no, actually not. No, it was during an investigation, and there was at one point just me and then 3 of us, and only Willie and I of the 3 of us picked up on the eucalyptus scent, and it dissipated very quickly. But
That's interesting.
We found out shortly later that several people had died of consumption in this house, and eucalyptus was used as a decongestant at that time.
And we also, one night, I left the recorder in the building, and there was nobody in there at all, in or even near the building, and we picked up an EVP of somebody coughing.
So
Really?
Yeah.
it's neat, and it's mind blowing, and it's an enigma, and you want to try and figure it out.
That's very true indeed. And, I think that when we try and answer the question of why do people experience these kind of phenomena, I think a number of factors need to align in order for it to happen, or it would be happening to us all day, every day. So I think it involves the individual themselves, their mental state at the time, their emotional state, various medical factors, I think. I think it involves the environment, it involves energies, it involves who they're with, the weather, the atmosphere. We're all aware of things like running water and standing water.
That's correct. Yeah.
Having a relationship and limestone and those kind of things. I think that there are so many factors that need to come into play in order for someone to successfully experience a paranormal event. And figuring out what those factors are is the big challenge for the paranormal investigator in the 21st century.
So it has to be kind of like the perfect storm.
Yeah, perfect storm.
Precisely.
Yeah. We had an investigator in here last week, and he swears that there's a high amount of activity when there is a water source nearby, particularly rivers that are divergent, that kind of flow away from a house or a building. So I think the water there enhances the conductivity sometimes.
And also I've noticed that several cases which have been very active, and a good example is the one you may have read about in Search of the Paranormal, the Pueblo Firehouse.
Oh, yes.
Which have a number of electrical lines very close to the building, in very close proximity to them, which I think acts as a power source, a power reservoir
I think
for
so too.
this stuff to manifest.
Yes. And this house that Willie and I have been investigating, it has absolutely no electricity, so we can rule that out, that it isn't anything electrical interfering.
Well, the nice thing about that is you can investigate the EMF levels and not have to worry about false positives.
That's true.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There is no power at all in the building, so there should be no EMF at all.
Yeah.
Indeed. Well, there should be natural EMF, of course, but certainly no artificial EMF.
Right. Well, before the show runs out, Richard, we both wanted to discuss the Clink. I found that so fascinating. The fact that it goes way back to 1151, and this prison was established by a bishop of no less, a bishop, and it's a house of horrors. And I don't think people are aware of the terrible things that went on in these prisons, and it's no wonder that there are restless spirits there. So would you like to highlight some of the things that transpired in this prison?
And also the Clink was built in the middle of a red light area too, which made for an interesting situation. So we've all heard that phrase, thrown in the Clink, and I don't think any of us have ever considered where it comes from. And it does come from a genuine prison named the Clink. In Southwark, in London, not very far from the Thames. And I had never heard of this place. The only reason I became aware of its existence was that my wife Laura and I were walking down a back street in London. We happened to pass it.
Really?
It's now a functioning museum. And it's a real house of horrors because they've put mannequins and those sort of things to illustrate how it looked when the occupants were being tortured. So the Clink itself got its name from one of two things, at least according to the on-site historian that I interviewed. He said it was either down to the clink of the keys of the jailers or the clink of the pin that they would hammer between your manacles to shackle you up. But whichever it was, it became known as the Clink, and there have been several buildings in that area that have had the name the Clink. The reason there have been several is that Londoners throughout history have taken a great joy in rioting, and whenever they would do that, they would release all of the prisoners from the Clink and then try and burn the place down.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, a Londoner instituted jailbreak, which I found quite funny. But so it's subterranean. You go down below ground level, and actually above the place is now a restaurant. And we had to wait to investigate until the restaurant had stopped moving tables and had closed down for the night. But there were people that spent practically their entire life in the Clink.
I know.
And if you had money, it actually wasn't all that bad because you could, relatively speaking anyway, because the guards were all to a man completely corrupt.
Oh.
So you could purchase anything that you wanted. They would bring you in a nice bed to sleep on. They would bring you in good food, all for a healthy fee, of course.
And fresh water, even.
For the poverty-stricken inmates, however, you lived in filth and squalor, usually your own filth and everybody else's. And when the Thames rose, the water table rose, you would be sitting in rank water 24 hours a day.
Horrible.
So that brought disease and pestilence, and a lot of people died within the walls of the Clink over the years under the most horrific of circumstances. And again, that leaves a mark on the building and on the atmosphere.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
You can't tell me that the restaurant above it isn't haunted.
Well, I would love to know, but they did not want to really talk about it. Of course, it might have been that I was there on a Saturday night, so that's a very busy night. But certainly the staff of the Clink were happy to talk about it, and should any of your readers listeners want to experience the Clink for themselves, there is a company called Haunted Happenings that takes regular overnight trips there, and you can judge for yourself. But apparitions are regularly seen inside those walls, regularly.
Really?
Well, I'll have to plan a trip on that.
Oh, I'd love to see it. There is only one original wall of the building left, is that right?
That's right, and it's a very old brick kind of wall that's in that area, and it's one of the oldest parts of London too. So the problem we experienced on a Saturday night is that the street outside the Clink, it's an old cobbled kind of street, very nice and historic looking, but it is also one of the main avenues that Londoners take when they're going from one pub to another on an evening. So, to put it delicately, there were some noises coming from the street. The sound of liquid hitting the cobblestones, if you're following me, that made it a real challenge until things quieted down to investigate.
Gee whiz. So that whole basement area under this restaurant was part of the Clink, correct?
Yeah, it's entirely subterranean. In fact, as you go through the doors, you go immediately downstairs. So there really is no above ground part of it apart from the outside doors.
And does it have like alcoves to it, like little tunnels and alcoves?
It has numerous small alcoves that you can go into, numerous dark corners, nooks and crannies, and things like that. And the Clink investigation is one of the only times in my career that I've ever been involved with a Ouija board. Not something that I would generally investigate with as a rule, but something that I'd really wanted to try because other people were doing it there.
Yeah,
and that led to some interesting experiences too.
Oh, you'll have to
We
tell
did not
us.
meet any of the ghosts of the Clink themselves through the Ouija board, but one of the young ladies who was present insists the spirit of her father came through on the board, and it was a very emotional experience for her.
That's very nice.
What is your opinion on the Ouija board, Richard?
Well, I think I have an open mind on the subject. On the one hand, I know too many investigators that I respect who have stories of using that board, or clients of theirs that use the board, seems to open the door to something pretty dark. There are very few good stories of people that have used Ouija boards. I don't know if that's been your experience, but certainly that's mine.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, there's the theory that what's going on is it's our own subconscious using the board, and it's micromuscular tremors in our fingers that are moving the glass, the planchette, or whatever is your pointing device.
Right. Yeah.
And I think there is some validity to that as well.
It's a possibility, but I don't think it's the only possibility.
Right, and I think we're very keen to find a black and white answer, when in reality, aspects of both might be true.
Yeah, good possibility is a combination.
Yeah.
But
And I think that's our still, though, isn't it? We're so keen to find concrete answers
we are.
And yet we are the ultimate gray area of science, really.
Yeah.
You also used dowsing rods, didn't you? Or someone else in your group did?
Somebody there did, and I decided this was going to be my opportunity to test dowsing, because I've been very skeptical. So we got a piece of this lady's personal stuff. I would say it was her cell phone. And it was hidden in the room, and she'd left the room, and we were going to hide it in the room, and she was supposed to douse for it. There's no way she could have known where it was. So I picked it up, and I placed it in my back pocket. And she began to douse, and I would move around the room, so I was literally giving her a moving target. And amazingly enough, she was able to track it down. She narrowed it down to my pocket. I was really surprised.
That is amazing. What is the principle at work there that allows that to happen?
Well, I don't know. Dowsing for water, I know I've heard that the concept of ley lines is fairly commonly accepted in the paranormal community, that there is some kind of energy. But that would not explain how someone is able to, for want of a better term, lock onto their own phone in my pocket using dowsing rods.
Truly, no. I bet you were stunned.
I was actually genuinely surprised. I'd expected it not to work, quite frankly.
We got about 4 minutes left here, Richard.
So, yeah, just as a warning, in case we get into a really deep conversation. So what was the end result of your investigation at the Clink? What did you wind up perceiving in the way of apparitions? Anything? EVPs?
Well, I was about to say the word unfortunately, but I think you know exactly what I mean when I say this. Unfortunately, like so many investigations, it raised more questions than it answered.
Really?
Yeah, and that's often the way, I find. So we didn't run into many of the historic figures that were supposed to haunt the Clink.
Yeah.
And yeah, I had some pretty impressive experiences with the dowsing rods and with a Ouija board, which changed the way I perceive investigative techniques. So I'm much more open to those, shall we say, less scientific or less mechanical engineering aspects of investigation now. The building itself is very atmospheric. The stories, again, from the staff, still plenty of reports of apparitions, but we did not see any of them put in an appearance the night I was there.
What are some of the stories of the historical figures that are there?
Well, perhaps the most intriguing one for my money is a plague-era doctor. And we've heard those stories, haven't we, of doctors that would wear face masks with beaks on them. That's a primarily Italian thing, in order to put herbs in to act as a filter against infection. One of those was reported to haunt the Clink by a visiting medium. They weren't able to determine why, but the fact that there should be a plague-era doctor, that apparition or that spirit would have to be several hundred years old.
Sure.
And so I found the backstory fascinating, but this was a part of London that was ground zero, really, for the plague, because ships would come in up the Thames.
Sure.
And we know that the plague was transmitted by rats as a vector, and they would get off the ships on the Thames. And so this was one of the original ports of entry, I think, for the plague in Britain. So I can quite see why that type of ghost would still be there.
They must have lost an awful lot of people, particularly in the prison at that time.
Well, indeed, because medical care was at its best primitive, and at its worst made you worse. But most folks simply couldn't afford even what medical care there was at the time. So people would die in droves. And in fact, that was happening throughout London and indeed the country.
Oh, it was just deplorable conditions that they lived under at the Clink.
Oh, yeah.
How long, why weren't these people ever released from prison? Because you did say so many of them had families and they lived and died there. What were their circumstances?
That's true. In fact, I've heard stories from the historian that there were actually children born there thanks to there being conjugal visits.
Oh, that's so sad.
I thought I remember seeing that in the book, that some were actually born there and lived there and died there. Is that right?
Which is, it's amazing. And many of the prisoners were debtors. They were people that had either fairly or not run up debts that they could not repay. And of course, how do you work to repay a debt if
When
you're
you're
in
in prison, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
it was a
tough one.
catch-22 situation for some of these poor souls. And of course, doubtless some of them did deserve it, but there were innocents in prison with hardened murderers, rapists, and other criminals, violent offenders.
Right.
And so there were victims and there were predators within the Clink itself, almost certainly.
It's almost as if they should release the children or release them at puberty or something because they did nothing wrong, but then they wouldn't be trained to go out and get a job.
Well, I think that in those days they could actually be sent out to try and work.
Could
Part of
they?
the problem was work at the time for an unskilled kid was basically pickpocketing.
Yep, stealing.
Yeah.
And it certainly wasn't as jolly and cheerful as we see in Oliver. It was a cutthroat business, and of course, if you got caught, where would you end up?
In the Clink.
Yeah, and right back in the Clink again.
Oh.
Yeah, so real lives of real hopelessness and despair, I think.
Yeah. Well, we are out of time, Richard.
Oh, that's a shame.
It is. It is.
been such a
really
pleasure.
enjoyed talking to you. You want to give out websites and where you can buy the books and all that stuff?
Certainly. I love to interact with my readers and with folks that are interested in the paranormal in general. So please come along and visit me at richardestep.net. That's richardestep.net. And I would love to talk to you, so come drop me a line.
Now that is a WordPress site. Is it interactive? Did you just establish that?
My email address is on there, so I can be emailed through that
I
site
see.
directly, and I respond to all emails.
Yes, and all three of your books are
Okay.
there, right? You've got 3 books now.
Actually, right now, if you count the pre-orders, I have 5.
Oh, really? Congratulations. That's terrific.
All right.
I know Haunted
thank you very
Longmont
much.
is one. Haunted Longmont. And then you've
Haunted
got...
Longmont is one. That's the history of my adopted hometown. You know about In Search of the Paranormal. I have my first novel came out earlier this year. That's called The Beast of My Soul. That is a vampires in the Napoleonic Wars novel.
Is it based on truth?
Yeah, muskets and supernatural. Actually, it is in the 80s. All of the military stuff in there has been researched thoroughly and is accurate.
Oh, terrific.
I've just added werewolves and vampires because everything is better with werewolves and vampires, right?
A spooky mix.
Okay.
And
My next novel is out in October, and that's called Agonal Breath. That is a classic haunted house novel about an old sanatorium and the ghosts that inhabit it. And finally, in January, they are releasing The World's Most Haunted Hospitals. Career
excellent.
Press.
All right.
I'm sorry, I forgot my publisher there. I've been getting them all mixed up. That's terrible. New Page Books is releasing The World's Most Haunted Hospitals, which, as a paramedic and a ghost hunter also, I look at some of the most haunted medical facilities in the world.
Well, we
All
look
right.
forward to checking that out.
Yes,
Thank you so much,
yes.
Richard. It's been enlightening.
Yes, thank you very much, Richard. Hopefully...
It has been my pleasure, and do give me a holler. I'll be happy to come back on anytime.
I was just going to
Wonderful.
say we'll have to have you come back again.
We'll do
I
that.
shall look forward to it.
All right.
Okay, Richard, thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Have a good night.
Have a great evening. Good night.
Okay, that is another episode of Spirit Radio, The Paranormal Experience.
You know, he's got so many spooky aspects. I can't wait to check it out. Well, thank you, everyone, for listening, and good night.